They said summer would last forever that year. The wheat stood high, and the skies over Mazovia were as blue as glass. The barracks smelled of oil and canvas, and our rifles, WZ-29 Mausers, old but loyal, gleamed under the sunlight like something sacred. We'd trained for months in the dust and heat, our boots cutting trenches into the earth, as if we could prepare the land itself for what was coming. Some of the older men said it would be nothing, just another border game like before. But the younger ones, we felt it. The quiet was too heavy, too precise, like the world was holding its breath. On August 31st, around midnight, word spread through the camp. Something had happened near Gleiwitz. The radio operator, pale and sweating, whispered it between bursts of static. The Germans are claiming we attacked them. We laughed at first. Everyone knew the stories about their provocations, their staged broadcasts. But the laughter didn't last. The captain gathered us at dawn and said only, "Men, we've been attacked. Germany crossed the border at dawn. Warsaw has declared full mobilization. This is war." No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to stop. Within an hour, the horizon to the west began to tremble. First came the dull hum of engines. Not trucks this time, but tanks, dozens, then hundreds. Panzers. We'd heard of them. The Panzerkampfwagen 1 and 2, fast, light, and terrifying in their coordination. They moved like a single body, armored beasts guided by radios and precision. We, by contrast, still relied on field messengers and shouted orders. As the first shells landed, the earth shook under us. A farmhouse vanished in a cloud of flame. Horses screamed, and the smell of fuel and dust filled the air. I remember thinking, absurdly, that it smelled like rain on metal. We fell back to Mokra that afternoon, ordered to form a defensive line with the Wawinska cavalry brigade. Cavalry, yes, we still had them. The Germans laughed about that later, saying we charged tanks with sabres. But that was never true. Our cavalrymen fought dismounted, rifles in hand, using every hedge and embankment as cover. When the 4th Panzer Division advanced, they met a wall of fire, Polish 37mm Bofors anti-tank guns, machine guns, and the stubborn will of men who refused to yield an inch of their homeland. I can still hear the sound, the sharp crack of Bofors rounds hitting steel, the echo of exploding tracks. We held them for hours. Then Stuka dive bombers came screaming down, Ju-87s, the Jericho trumpets, their sirens wailing like something unholy. The ground erupted in flame and shrapnel. Horses scattered, wounded men screamed for medics, and the radios crackled with half-heard orders. We withdrew in the smoke, regrouped near the tree line. Out of a company of 140, I counted 89 still standing. But the Germans didn't take Mokra that day. For that one brief moment, we'd stopped the Blitzkrieg cold. In those first days, we learned to love our weapons like brothers. The WS-35 anti-tank rifle. It could punch clean through the armor of a Panzer 1 or 2 at 100 meters. When it hit, the round would ricochet inside the tank like a trapped demon, killing everything within. But we had so few of them. Some units had one per platoon, some none at all. Our airmen fought bravely too. The PZLP-11 fighters, outmatched, underpowered, but flown by men with the courage of eagles. They went up against Messerschmitt B, F-109s, and Heinkel bombers, knowing they couldn't outrun or outgun them. Yet, on September 1st, alone, they downed 16 German aircraft. We cheered when we heard that. For a moment, it felt like maybe just maybe, we could stand. But Blitzkrieg wasn't a battle. It was a storm. They didn't fight us where we were strongest. They moved around us, cut supply lines, crushed communication. Their tanks didn't stop to duel. They bypassed, encircled, isolated. By September 5th, our unit was down to half strength. The roads east were clogged. Civilians, wounded soldiers, wagons overturned in ditches. Above us, Stukas hunted anything that moved. At night, we could see Warsaw burning in the distance, a red smear against the horizon. Still, our orders were simple: hold as long as possible. And so we did. We began to move at night, hiding by day under camouflage nets and broken barns. The radio still spoke, though less each day. Poznan army engaged, Watch army retreating, Warsaw under attack. And then, silence. Captain Wroblewski gathered us again. He said, "Gentlemen, history will remember what we do here. Not for victory, but for defiance. We were soldiers of a nation surrounded, yet unbeaten in spirit. We had no illusion of rescue. France and Britain had declared war, yes, but their guns were silent. The promise of help was just that, a promise carried on wind. But among us, none spoke of surrender. We still had our rifles. We still had Poland. We withdrew east under cover of night, following what remained of the 2nd Infantry Division. Every step felt heavier, not just from exhaustion, but from what we left behind. Villages in ruin, fields churned by treads, roads littered with burned trucks and the bodies of horses. The air itself smelled of iron and sorrow. Our destination was Kutno, where the generals planned a counterattack near the Bzura River. They called it a chance to strike back, to cut into the German flanks pressing toward Warsaw. We called it something else. Hope. We knew the odds. The Germans had more of everything: tanks, aircraft, artillery, fuel. We had courage, rifles, and a love of our soil so deep it could drown us. But orders were orders. And when dawn broke on September 9th, we formed up in the mist, bayonets fixed, waiting for the whistle. The first barrage came from our side, a thunder of 75mm field guns shaking the air. For a moment, it felt like 1920 again, when we'd turned back the Red Army at the gates of Warsaw. Then came the advance, infantry moving in disciplined lines, cavalry striking through gaps, armored cars rumbling forward under the white and red banners of the Republic. The Germans were caught by surprise. For the first time, they were the ones on the back foot. Our men captured several towns, Łęczyca, Piontek, even pushed back elements of the 8th and 10th armies. For 3 days, victory hung within reach. I remember standing on the Bzura's bank, watching our soldiers cross under artillery fire. A lieutenant beside me, his uniform blackened with soot, said quietly, "This is what they'll write about, if anyone survives to write." But then the sky turned black, with the wings of the Luftwaffe. Heinkels, Dornier, Stukas. They came in waves. Our columns on the roads were massacred. Stukas dove almost vertically, their sirens screaming, dropping 250-kilogram bombs on convoys that had nowhere to hide. Horses panicked, wagons overturned, ammunition carts exploded, and the river ran red with men and mud. We had no air cover. Our PZL fighters were either destroyed or too far away. We fired rifles at the sky because it was all we could do. By September 12th, the counterattack had turned into a slaughter. German armor closed in from every side. The river became our graveyard. When we tried to retreat, we found every bridge destroyed. Men swam across under fire, clinging to helmets and rifles. Those who made it regrouped in the forests. I was among them, dirty, hungry, exhausted, and somehow still alive. We still had a handful of Bofor's guns, hidden among the trees. Each was precious, a weapon that could still make a difference. When a German column appeared on the road below, we opened fire. The first round tore through a Panzer II's side armor, exploding its engine. The second hit an armored car, sending it spinning into a ditch. But their response was swift. Artillery and mortars tearing through the trees. Branches rained down, and the world turned to dust and splinters. Afterward, when the guns fell silent, we counted what we had left. 2 functioning Bofors, 1 radio, and a few dozen men who still believed. We decided to move toward Warsaw. The capital was still holding, still calling for help. If we could reach it, maybe we could join the defense. Maybe we could stand one last time where the world could see us. The journey took days. We moved at night, through forests and empty villages. Everywhere we went, we saw the same thing. Devastation. Bridges collapsed, fields burned, people fleeing east with whatever they could carry. Once, we passed a group of children walking alone. Their mother had been killed in a bombing raid. They carried a small flag between them, red and white, torn and dirty. They didn't cry, they just kept walking. I gave them my last piece of bread. By September 15th, we could hear Warsaw's guns in the distance, deep, rhythmic, defiant. The city was surrounded, but it was fighting back. When we entered Warsaw, it was chaos. Soldiers, civilians, nurses, all working side by side. The streets were cratered, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burning fuel. But the spirit, that was unbroken. General Walerian Chuma commanded the defense. Every building became a fortress, every intersection a killing ground. Our anti-aircraft crews, firing 40mm Bofors guns, brought down German bombers right over the rooftops. We cheered every time one fell. I took position near the western suburbs, alongside a mix of soldiers, policemen, and civilians with hunting rifles. We dug trenches between trolley tracks and overturned buses. When the tanks came, we waited until they were close, then fired from the windows, from cellars, from anywhere that gave cover. The Germans used everything: tanks, mortars, dive bombers. But the people of Warsaw refused to kneel. At night, we could see the city glowing from fires, but in the darkness came voices, songs, prayers, whispered words of defiance. Someone played a harmonica once, and for a moment, the war felt far away. By the 3rd week of September, ammunition was running out. We'd rationed food to 1 meal a day. The hospitals overflowed, men lying in corridors, some still gripping rifles even in their final moments. Then came the news that broke us. On September 17th, the Soviet Union had invaded from the east. For a long time, no one spoke. We'd been fighting one monster, and now another had entered from behind. It felt like betrayal by fate itself. Captain Roblowski, his uniform torn, his voice hoarse, gathered us in a ruined schoolyard. He said only, "We are surrounded, but not defeated. Remember that. Poland fights wherever a Polish heart still beats." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of the map, how our country was being cut apart, carved by hands that had no right to it. And still, we fought. By late September, Warsaw was half in ruins and half a miracle. Every street corner had a story, every building a wound. The Luftwaffe came daily, their shadows slicing across the city like blades. The bombs fell without pause, on homes, on hospitals, on churches marked with red crosses. Yet the people still moved through the smoke, carrying water in buckets, bread in pockets, bandages made from torn shirts. Children helped dig trenches. Women ran communications. Priests gave last rites under falling shells. No one called it bravery anymore. It was survival. Stubborn, fierce, and quiet. I was stationed near the Saxon Garden, manning a machine gun post with what remained of our platoon. The weapon, a WWII Browning, 7.92 millimeters, overheated often, but we kept it running with oil scavenged from wrecked cars. When the Germans pushed through Marszałkowska Street, we opened fire. The tracer rounds cut through the smoke, bright lines against the grey. For a few hours, we held. Then they brought tanks. Panzer IVs this time, heavier armour, longer barrels. Our Bofors guns were gone. We had only Molotov cocktails and desperation. We waited until they turned the corner, then lit the bottles and threw. One tank burned, black smoke rising like a flag. The others kept coming. We fell back building by building, floor by floor, until we reached the ruins of the post office. There, amid broken mail sacks and shattered glass, we dug in again. By the 23rd, the radio broadcasts from Warsaw grew weaker. Still, they sent messages, not of surrender, but of defiance. Warsaw fights on, they said. Poland is not yet lost. Those words spread like fire among us. Even men who could barely stand repeated them, whispering as if they were prayers. But reality was closing in. We were surrounded. Supplies were gone. Every hour brought more shelling. In one bombardment, a shell landed near our position. When the dust cleared, only 6 of us were left. We dragged the wounded to what used to be a cellar, now just a pit of brick and earth. One of them, a boy no older than 17, asked if we'd won yet. I told him we were still fighting. He smiled before he died. By then, our weapons were relics of defiance. Rifles with worn barrels, captured German grenades, even hunting shotguns. Anything that could fire was used. In the northern district, some men managed to repair a captured Panzer I. They painted the Polish eagle on its side and drove it straight into battle. It didn't last long. A German 37mm shell stopped it cold. But for a moment, it felt like justice. Our anti-aircraft crews still fought too. Even with no ammunition, they stood by their guns during raids, as if presence alone could shield the city. Some said it did. On September 25th, the Germans launched what they called Wielki Nalot na Warszawę, the Great Raid on Warsaw. Over 400 bombers filled the sky, dropping thousands of incendiary and high-explosive bombs. The noise was like the sky breaking apart. Fires spread through every district. The old city burned. The royal castle burned. Even the hospitals burned. We fought the fires with bare hands, buckets, and tears. That night, the city glowed orange against the clouds. People prayed openly in the streets, their voices rising above the roar of collapsing walls. The next day, General Chuma met with the civilian mayor, Stefan Starzyński, the man who had become the soul of Warsaw. They agreed enough blood had been spilled. On September 28, 1939, the city surrendered. But surrender is not the same as defeat. When the Germans entered, they found a city that had resisted them longer than they ever imagined. A city reduced to rubble, yes, but never to submission. We were taken prisoner soon after, disarmed, searched, lined up. The German officer who inspected us looked almost impressed. He said something in his language. I only caught one word. Sehr. Tough. We were marched out of the city for days, our boots leaving blood on the road. At night we slept in fields, under watch. Some tried to escape. Few made it. The camps were cold and crowded. Rations were thin. Black bread, watery soup, sometimes less. But we shared stories, news, songs. It was the only way to stay alive inside. One man, a teacher before the war, recited poetry each night. Another carved a small Polish eagle from wood. He said, "If they take our weapons, we'll fight with words. If they take our words, we'll fight with memory." We all believed him. Even in captivity we heard the news. The Soviets had taken Lwów, Wilno, Grodno, the eastern half of Poland now under their control. Our allies, Britain and France, had declared war on Germany weeks ago, but the front in the west remained silent. The help we'd been promised never came. For many of us, that was the hardest part. Not defeat, but abandonment. We had done what honor demanded. We stood, we fought, we fell. And yet the world moved on as if Poland had simply vanished between two empires. Still, we whispered the same phrase every night. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła. Poland is not yet lost. In the months that followed, whispers of resistance began to spread. Some escaped captivity, others hid in forests, forming the first bands that would become the Armia Krajowa, the home army. Even in defeat, something was born, a flame that refused to go out. I never saw Captain Roblowski again. Rumor said he'd made it to Romania, maybe France, maybe even England. Some of our airmen escaped too, flying whatever planes they could find over the Baltic or through Romania. They would fight again, in the skies over Britain, in France, in Africa, carrying Poland's spirit with them wherever they went. And for those of us left behind, our battlefield had only changed shape. It was no longer fought with rifles, but with whispers, with hidden radios, with hope. Years have passed, but the sounds of that September have never truly left me. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I still hear the distant hum of engines, that low, steady thunder of Panzers rolling across open ground. I still smell the gun oil, the cordite, the smoke of burning fields. It's strange what memory keeps. We forget faces, but we remember the way the earth trembled under us. After the fall of Warsaw, after the last orders were given and the last rifles silenced, there was a kind of quiet that felt wrong. For weeks, the air itself seemed stunned. The cities lay broken, the roads full of refugees, and the once proud Polish army, men of every province, farmers, teachers, clerks, and soldiers, had been scattered like dust on the wind. But inside, something remained, something unbroken. I was sent to a prisoner camp near Łódź, then moved east as the front lines changed. Winter came early that year, bitter, dry, endless. The guards grew meaner as supplies thinned. We built makeshift stoves from tin cans, burned anything that would catch. One night, I traded my last piece of bread for a pencil stub and a scrap of paper. On it, I wrote down the names of every man from my platoon I could remember. 42 names. Of those, I would later learn that fewer than 10 survived the war. When spring came, rumors spread that in the forests, Polish partisans were fighting again. In the south, in the mountains near Nowy Sącz, resistance cells were ambushing convoys, cutting phone lines, and smuggling people to Hungary. Even here, behind wire and watchtowers, we felt it. The war that had taken our homeland was not over. It had only changed faces. We had gone to war with what we had: Mausers, Beauforts, courage, and a century of defiance in our blood. Against us stood one of the most modern war machines in history. Tanks with radios, planes that could strike with surgical precision, armies that moved as if guided by one mind. But what we lacked in technology, we made up for in heart. For every tank we could not stop, we built a story that would one day inspire someone else to fight. The men who defended Westerplatte for 7 days against impossible odds. The cavalry who held at Mokra. The pilots who took off, knowing they would never return. The Germans called it Polnische Unordnung, Polish chaos. But it wasn't chaos. It was courage, without the luxury of hope. When the Soviets crossed from the east, the last illusions of safety died. 2 armies, 2 ideologies, 1 purpose, to erase us. They signed their pact, drew their lines, and divided the heart of Europe as if it were a chessboard. We lost everything that could be measured. Land, freedom, lives. But what could not be measured, the will to exist, survived underground. The invasion of 1939 was not just the fall of a nation. It was the beginning of an endurance the world would come to understand only years later. Some of us escaped through Romania, Hungary, Lithuania, a river of displaced soldiers and airmen flowing west. By 1940, many of them wore new uniforms, French, then British. They fought in Narvik, in Tobruk, in the Battle of Britain, and on the beaches of Normandy. When the RAF pilots took to the skies over England, many carried memories of that September, of burning fields, of lost comrades, of home. They fought with vengeance, not for conquest, but for return. And when Churchill himself said, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few," some of those few were ours, Poles, men who had seen their country die once and swore it would never happen again. War strips everything away, rank, pride, illusions, until only the truth remains. And the truth is this: we did not lose because we were weak. We lost because we were alone. But in that solitude, we found something powerful: unity born of suffering, identity forged in fire. Every hill we defended, every street we held, every trench we dug, they all became symbols, not of defeat, but of endurance. We showed the world how the first victims of tyranny fought back. And though our allies' promises faded, our example remained, a warning, a lesson, a testament. Sometimes I think of Captain Wroblewski. I imagine him standing somewhere far away in a foreign uniform, looking east toward the land we left behind. Maybe he wonders, as I do, what all the fighting was for. Then I remember the old farmer from that last summer, the one who saluted us as he fled. "You'll stop them," he'd said. We didn't, but we slowed them. We bled them. We reminded them that conquest is not victory. And in the end, when the war finally turned, when German cities burned, and their armies broke before the red tide, I hope they remembered Warsaw. I hope they remembered that the first to stand against them were Poles. Tired, outnumbered, but unafraid. The world calls it the beginning, the first campaign of World War II. But for those of us who lived it, it was an ending too. An ending of innocence, of peace, of the belief that courage alone could stop the storm. Yet I like to think that in some way it was also a seed, the start of everything that came after. The underground, the resistance, the uprisings, the return of a free Poland decades later. All of it began with the men and women who refused to bow in September 1939. We were not heroes. We were just soldiers doing what we thought was right. But if there's any justice in history, let it remember us, not for how we fell, but for how we stood.